Quick question for you. How is Calvin and Hobbes like the work of George Seurat? Anyone? Well, let's take a look. George Seurat was a 19th century French painter. More specifically, he was a post-impressionist. Among artists you may have heard of, this lumps Seurat in with Cézanne, Gauguin, and Van Gogh. If you've heard of Seurat, it's probably because of this painting, a Sunday afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte, or because of the technique he pioneered, of which this is an example, pointillism. You see, as much as being a painter, Seurat was a color theorist. He was very interested in the science of this thing called color, and he had a theory. He knew that mixing paints together sullied their color. That no matter how careful you were on the palette or on the canvas, mixing, for example, red and blue paint together created a violet that was ultimately dulled by reality, by its mere existence. Instead, he proposed, what if one was to paint not by blending colors at all, not in the traditional way, but by putting tiny dots of red right next to tiny dots of blue? Then, when viewed from any distance, the eyes do the blending for you. Your brain creates the idea of purple inside your head. Seurat felt that with this process, a more perfect violet was formed in your mind's eye. Now, hold on to that for a moment while we shift gears. This is Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin is the short one. If you aren't familiar with Calvin and Hobbes, you have my deepest sympathies. Calvin and Hobbes was a popular comic strip in the late 80s and mid-90s. It follows the exploits of Calvin, this precocious 6-year-old, and his stuffed tiger. Calvin is thoughtful and imaginative, but not particularly well-behaved. You might think of him as a more philosophical Dennis the Menace. Now, a running gag in the strip for many years was the noodle incident, an event alluded to in several strips as the epitome of mayhem brought about by Calvin's mischief-making. As a kid reading the books, I was always looking for the noodle incident strip. I kept wondering what had happened, just what had Calvin done that could be considered so infamous. And then one day I came across this quote from Bill Watterson, Calvin's creator. The noodle incident I have referred to in several strips is left to the reader's imagination, where it is sure to be more outrageous. There never was a noodle incident strip. Watterson realized that nothing he could write could possibly compare to the wildly outlandish scenarios invented by people's minds at the mere suggestion of that event. Now, why is this important? If we trust Seurat and Watterson, and I do, we can take from their examples that a thing is more vivid when it exists as a construct in your mind. This is similar to the idea of Plato's theory of forms, but it's also the same reason a joke is so much less funny once you explain it. Humor and other ideas exist in their ideal form in the mind, implied rather than verbalized. In communication and advertising, it's relatively straightforward to create the things that go into people's eyeballs and ear holes. But the real challenge and the real value to a brand is when we can create something inside the audience's mind, and the more vivid and real, the more valuable. Advertisers can sit and tell people all day that this product is very valuable, but will anyone believe us? Instead, we can lay out all the pieces and lead the audience to dropping them into place themselves, so that they make their decision on their own. You know, I think this is very valuable. People invariably trust their own personal conclusions much more than a brand's assertion. We can take them pretty far along as long as that last synapse firing is their own. The mental switch that finally completes the circuit happens inside their head. And just like the more perfect violet is formed in the mind's eye, and just like no written account of the noodle incident could possibly live up to the half-imagined versions inside your head, the perception of value that we assert for a product or a brand can never be as real or as vivid as the one we set up for the consumer to arrive at on their own. This means that the artistry in communication is not in crafting what you say, but in crafting what your audience thinks. And that in advertising, sometimes the most effective pieces of communication are the things left unsaid.